This is Sylvia Plath, and in October 1962, during a furious blaze of creativity, she wrote Lady Lazarus, one of her last poems, and one of the most controversial you're likely to encounter. Lady Lazarus is bold, provocative, and problematic. It spits hot with anger and teems with brazen confrontation. It's a traumatic poem, in that it's both about trauma and traumatic to read, and it's rife with irony. Plath takes the biblical story of the resurrection of Lazarus and turns it firmly on its head. A story about the miracle of new life, the power of belief, and the glory of God becomes, in Plath's hands, a seething depiction of exploitation, torture, and vengeance. Plath takes the grand old themes of life, death, and rebirth and subverts the out of them, forcing us to witness the commodification, the commercialization of people, trauma, and the things we hold most sacred. This video will dissect Lady Lazarus, to examine how Plath expertly critiques the commodification of trauma, how she exposes the lengths people will go to make a spectacle of, and a profit off, a person's suffering. But it's also going to question whether Plath herself is complicit. As I said, this is a controversial poem, and Plath was a controversial poet. As much as Plath's suffering is evoked in Lady Lazarus, is she also guilty of exploiting the suffering and trauma of others? But before we attempt to answer that question, welcome. I'm Dr. Rosie Whitcombe, this is Mousy the Most Delectable, and we make videos on the written word in all its guises, so please subscribe if that's your jam. We want to extend a huge thank you to our patrons over on Patreon and channel members here on YouTube. We're so grateful for your support in the making of our videos, and if you'd like to join them, there's a link down below. Please also be aware going forward that this video contains discussions of body horror, suicide, self-harm, depression, anti-Semitism, the Holocaust, and death. It's good to be mindful, as you watch this video, that Plath's poems carry an immense weight. They're heavy, they're dark, they're intense. As Stephen Gould Axelrod writes, they emanate a heat and light that can still combust a reader today. So, let's journey back to October 1962 to really get to grips with Lady Lazarus and discover how Sylvia Plath made poetry out of trauma, horror, and death. Towards the end of her brief life, Sylvia Plath wrote what is arguably her most memorable, fiery, and infamous poetry. Daddy, the Jailer, and of course Lady Lazarus are just a few of Plath's poems written in this period and within very close succession of one another that seethe and burn and provoke. It's easy to read them as cries for help. The tragic reality is that a mere 4 months after composing such desperate, angry poems, Plath would take her own life. Her writing, during this final period of her life, was arguably at its most powerful, unrestrained, and raw. As Gould Axelrod writes, her gloves are off, her nerves are splayed, and her willingness to accommodate has vanished. These poems are tragic and filled with sorrow, but they're also bold and commanding. It's like if Plath ever had any to give, they have all very much evaporated by October 1962.
I have done it again. 1 year in every 10 I manage it.
So Lady Lazarus begins, with a very tight and intriguing opening line. We might find ourselves asking, what has the speaker done again? What is this thing she does every 10 years? And we need look no further than the poem's biblical namesake, Lazarus, to find an answer. As set down in the Gospel of John, Lazarus was a man who, 4 days after his death, was resurrected from the grave by JC himself. And when he thus had spoken, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth! And he that was dead came forth, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was bound about with a napkin. Jesus saith unto them, Loose him, and let him go. A pretty neat trick, and one which helped to cement Jesus' reputation as a miracle man. Now, as far as the Bible story is concerned, Jesus resurrecting Lazarus was a miracle. Something holy and divine, faith-affirming, evidence of the glory of God. Jesus resurrected a dead man. This was pretty spectacular stuff. Lady Lazarus is also being resurrected. She's also cheating death. Here, close to the start of the poem, we might be tempted to read something empowering in this resurrection. The speaker is revived. Perhaps she's unstoppable. She cannot be vanquished. She becomes a figure of fear, directly asking, "O my enemy, do I terrify?" as she rises from the grave. She has the ability to transcend mortality and become something superhuman, strong and fearsome. But the poem doesn't rest on this idea. For Plath's speaker, unlike the OG Lazarus, resurrection is a far cry from a cause for celebration. Plath takes Lazarus's miraculous resurrection and subverts it into a harrowing narrative about attempted suicide, voyeurism, and the erasure of body autonomy.
This is number 3.
She writes, a third death, a third attempt at ending everything. But as much as the speaker might want to put an end to her life, to put a final stop to everything, to make that choice for herself, she can't.
The nose, the eye pits, the full set of teeth, the sour breath will vanish in a day. Soon, soon the flesh the grave cave ate will be at home on me, and I a smiling woman.
The speaker experiences a unique tragedy. No matter what she tries, no matter how many times she dies, she always comes back. Her body puts itself back together time and again. What we get is a disturbing sense of the speaker's lack of autonomy. If we're reading this poem as a reflection on suicide, the fact the speaker is resurrected and reassimilated into the world as a smiling woman belies a darker truth. Once revived, she isn't grateful or joyous. She's a party trick, a commodity masked in a smile.
The peanut-crunching crowd shoves in to see them unwrap me hand and foot. The big strip tease. Gentlemen, ladies, these are my hands, my knees.
Roll up, feed on the spectacle. Plath really captures the carelessness of the shoving, guzzling crowd who line up to consume the speaker with their eyes like a fairground attraction. She's dehumanised, degraded, unwrapped, undressed, to be leered at, body part after body part. She is dissected. As Lisa Nabasuba writes, each piece of Lady Lazarus is flagrantly on show, in much the same way as the earliest condemned criminals were on display during public tortures and executions. Rather than being kept quietly contained and hidden, as in modern methods of imprisonment, her torture plays out in full view of the public. This is a violence enacted upon the speaker, and it only intensifies as the poem continues.
Dying is an art, like everything else. I do it exceptionally well. I do it so it feels like hell. I do it so it feels real. I guess you could say I've a call. It's easy enough to do it in a cell. It's easy enough to do it and stay put. It's the theatrical comeback in broad day to the same place, the same face, the same brute, amused shout, a miracle that knocks me out.
There's a knife-edge tension here between irony, razor-sharp humour, and the depths of the speaker's unbearable depression. Dying is an art. I do it exceptionally well. Reminds me of Oscar Wilde and that deliberate flippancy over serious things. It's funny, it's brash, it's provocative. But then we've got lines like, I do it so it feels like hell. I do it so it feels real. These lines that are stoppered, pause after pause with full stops, to hammer home each individual sentiment that the speaker kills herself to hurt herself, to feel something real, to feel anything other than the numbness of her depression. And then we're back to humour with, I guess you could say I've got a call. The sardonic entreaty that dying is her calling in life. And hey, if you've got a calling in life, you better profit off it. What better thing to do with your gifts than to make money, to wow the crowds, to put on a show for the brutes who will pay good coin to lap it all up. This isn't a holy miracle, it's a violent, aggressive, money-making stunt.
There is a charge for the eyeing of my scars. There is a charge for the hearing of my heart. It really goes. And there is a charge, a very large charge, for a word or a touch or a bit of blood or a piece of my hair or my clothes.
The intimacy, the state of undress, the prying into her body, the listening to her heartbeat. This isn't just voyeurism, it's touching, taking, physically violating. The speaker is quite literally selling herself, selling parts of herself, drawing blood for profit. And this all begs the question, who is profiting? As the poem goes on to suggest, it's certainly not the speaker.
So, Herr Doctor. So, Herr Enemy. I am your opus. I am your valuable. the pure gold baby that melts to a shriek. I turn and burn.
Now, you might be wondering why Plath uses the German Herr Doktor and Herr Enemy here, and I'll get to that shortly, but for now, let's focus on this idea that a man, an undisclosed, unnamed man, is the one who profits off her dismemberment. She is, after all, his valuable, his pure gold baby, a perfect image of male possession, the thing he goes on to burn, poke and stir until there's nothing left of her but ash. Her glory, her resurrection is short-lived. And she isn't being revived so she can live and thrive, but so she can be put on display, earn money for someone else's pocket, and suffer a deliberate, spectacular burn into nothingness. But, importantly, the poem doesn't end here. From the horror, from the spectacle, from the ash, she once again emerges.
Hear God, hear Lucifer, beware, beware. Out of the ash I rise with my red hair, and I eat men like air.
This is Plath giving no fucks, right? The speaker is ready for the fight. She's taking them all on here, God, the devil, and everyone in between, and she makes it clear that she will rise again, like a phoenix from the ashes, and get her revenge. From being stripped and dismembered, she rises and grows in a flash of colour and consumes those who once consumed her. This ending can be read as a furious, unflinching critique of the commodification of her suffering. She will not stand for the systems, the structures that turn her into a spectacle and profit off her depression and her death. Bring me back one too many times, she says, and I will devour you whole. Lady Lazarus is an unabashed attack on the commodification of trauma. Those final lines have become something of a feminist anthem, and I totally understand the appeal. And if only we could leave it at that. But we cannot. This poem is provocative in the way it ends up empowering the speaker, but it's provocative in other ways too. As Melanie Waters writes, Sylvia Plath generated a series of fierce debates as a result of the Nazi Jew symbolism in her poems Daddy and Lady Lazarus. Now, Daddy, I would argue, is the more controversial of the two. The imagery is more intense, more brazen, and there's more of it in the poem. Take stanza 7, for example.
An engine, chuffing me off like a Jew to Dachau, Auschwitz, Belsen. I began to talk like a Jew. I think I may well be a Jew.
Now, Plath, for the record, was not Jewish, but in Daddy and in Lady Lazarus, she repeatedly assumes, or appropriates, the identities of Jewish Holocaust victims. In Lady Lazarus, the speaker refers to her post-resurrection skin as
bright as a Nazi lampshade, my face a featureless, fine Jew linen.
We've got the repeated use of Herr, the German for Mr., and we've got this stanza, close to the poem's end.
A cake of soap, a wedding ring, a gold filling.
The allusions in this stanza are perhaps especially dark. A wedding ring and a gold filling are reminiscent of the kinds of personal belongings taken from concentration camp inmates upon their arrival. And the cake of soap could refer to the rumour that the Nazis made soap out of the fat of their victims. So, we read these poems. We're confronted with all this imagery, all this allusion, but why? What is Plath doing here, and why is she doing it? It's difficult to read these lines and not wince and reel in how heavy and inappropriate they feel. And it's in these lines that the fierce controversy over Plath's work and her right or lack thereof as a poet to say these things really takes hold. The question at the heart of it all, as I see it, is this. By adopting Holocaust imagery into her poetry, is Plath appropriating tragedy and using the suffering, the trauma of a group to which she doesn't belong, to make a profit? Now, for the record, Plath didn't make a literal profit off these poems. They were published posthumously in the collection Ariel 2 years after her death. But did Plath benefit in other ways from using Holocaust imagery? Is she using it fairly? Does she even have a right to go there? Where is the line between bold, controversial poetics and the literary co-opting of genocide? For some, what Plath is doing here isn't a problem. She's expertly adapting the language of the Holocaust to evoke the magnitude of her personal suffering. Perhaps, as she sees it, the best way, the only way that she can express the extent of her suffering is by relating it, embedding it, in the horrors of the Holocaust, which in 1962 was a relatively recent memory. She's doing it deliberately, to pack a punch, to make her poetry more impactful. And within this, she's honouring the memory of the victims of the Holocaust. Plath keeps cultural memory alive, blessing the victims through a fantasy of identification. She's refusing to ignore this atrocity. She won't sidestep round it. She's putting it front and centre in her poetry, refusing to shy away from it, while also using it to express her own personal traumas. Al Strangeways argues that Plath's use of Holocaust metaphors was responsible, and shows up the complexity of poetic composition. The unsettling appearance of the Holocaust in her later poems stems from a complex of reasons concerning her divided view about the uses of poetry and the related conflict she explores between history and myth. Is Plath bold, perhaps, bravely pushing the limits of poetry of what should and should not be said? Is she consciously and carefully examining her own writing process and expanding the bounds of poetry? For some, the answer is a resounding yes. But for others, deploying Holocaust metaphors in this fashion is not okay and reeks of egotism and opportunism. As Lily Shanahan writes in an article titled Holding Sylvia Plath Accountable, we cannot discuss Sylvia Plath without approaching the subject of her blatant racism and disrespect for black people and Jewish people. Her poems crassly compare her suffering to that of the Holocaust, and beyond her fiction, Plath's diaries, dating back to her high school years, show a history of hateful and disrespectful white supremacist thinking. Plath used anti-Semitic language to describe her husband Ted Hughes' family, and more generally, her writing contains lots of racist language and stereotypes. And this, for critics and readers of Plath, poses a problem. We can't, or at least we shouldn't, ignore this ugly facet of Plath's work. Now, I'm not saying that if you write an essay on Sylvia Plath and don't address her racism, that you're ignoring the problem and pretending it doesn't exist. There are plenty of ways to read her poetry. What I'm getting at is that it's all too easy to overlook, or excuse, or largely ignore her racism because of her talent and her progressive thinking and writing in other areas. Perhaps the bravery, the fierceness of her poetry has led some to excuse the glaring racist issues in her work. Oh, she's just a product of her time. Everyone was racist back in the day, right? But this argument only goes so far, if it goes at all. This quote from a blog post by Gail Crowther is an astute summation of the issue. That Plath could use the N-word in a poem shows that she did not engage with the history or power of language in this instance, or consider the impact of perpetuating it. This is where the argument, oh, but it was different back then, comes in. It was okay to use language like that back then. Except, of course, it wasn't. It has never been okay to use language like this. Perhaps what this argument really means is that when people did use language like this back then, there was less chance of them being called out for it. Social acceptance is not the same as something being morally acceptable. Taking Plath's racism on board and confronting it is likely to leave us, as readers of Plath, divided, on the fence as to how to approach her work or think of her as a poet or human being. This seems to be the case for George Steiner, writing in 1969, who praises some of Plath's Holocaust imagery, which stands out sharp and clean as glass, and indeed he praises Plath more generally as a poet, but he also admits that her grim fiction leaves him uneasy. Does any writer, does any human being other than an actual survivor have the right to put on this death rig? What extraterritorial right had Sylvia Plath, she was a child, plump and golden in America when the trains actually went, to draw on the reserves of animate horror in the ash and the children's shoes? Do any of us have license to locate our personal disasters, raw as these may be, in Auschwitz? Steiner's questions here make me think back to that idea of commodification. They make me consider the ethics of commodifying the self, but more importantly, of commodifying the bodies, legacies, and identities of others. I'm left wondering about the limits of using and commercialising and capitalising on trauma, especially when that trauma isn't yours. As Emily Van Duyn argues, Plath can imagine she is all of these people, and crucially, she tries on these identities because she can take them right off, like a white girl donning a Cherokee headdress at Coachella. There is a remarkable tension between Plath, author of brave, iconic, feminist prose and poetry who wrote openly and powerfully about mental health and suicide, versus Plath, who wrote lots of harmful, derogatory, racist things both privately and publicly. Now, I want to acknowledge Plath's talent and her struggles, her severe depression, her attempts on her own life articulated with such gravitas in poems like Lady Lazarus. I also want to acknowledge another idea I came across in this blog post, that Plath herself is often commodified, used as a byword for mental illness or depression or suicide in a way that risks reducing her whole life, her whole body of work, to her death, and not seeing past that tragic context when reading her poetry. Plath wrote excellent, trailblazing feminist poetry, but that poetry contains lots of racist language, and that feminism was very white. As far as Lady Lazarus is concerned, what we're left with is a poem that does two main things, I think. It rages bravely and unflinchingly at a mid-century patriarchal domestic establishment that ensnares, abuses and commodifies women and their suffering. And it uses, appropriates and commodifies the suffering of Jewish people and Holocaust victims. Plath's choices here, how they impact her poetry, legacy and her readers, are something I really want to think about more, and I'd really like to know what you think. On which side of the controversy do you sit? Or do you find yourself straddling the fence? Please let me know in the comments below. I swear, our videos just keep getting more and more disturbing. I'm sorry, I don't intend for it to be that way, but hey, thank you for sticking around. And if you like learning about controversial public figures and whether or not writers should be censored, watch our video on Roald Dahl and the controversy of posthumous editing by clicking here next.